Haunted Texas Road. When I was 15 years old, my dad built a new home in River Canard, a little community in Ontario, and this is where we relocated to. We had over an acre of property and were surrounded by woods and farmland, except for a few homes in the area. At present, this area is heavily developed with new homes. Our old home still looks great. Texas Road was up the road from us. This is a road that many say is haunted, and there is a lot of ghostly activity that takes place there. My brother, who was 16 years old at the time, asked if I wanted to go for a ride with him in his new car and take a neighbor friend of his to Texas Road to see if it was really haunted. I said sure, thinking that we would get a good spook. Hearing all of the stories about this road, I didn't believe in much of this and thought the stories were made up. It was daylight and the sun was nice and warm. From our street, we made a left turn onto Texas Road and started to drive a little slow, not too fast. There weren't too many homes on this road. There supposedly was a haunted cemetery and bridge that got washed out. You can't miss it if you're driving there. Even though the sun was out that day, it was kind of getting a little dull and dreary on this road, riding up to this area. Finally, my brother stopped the car and said, "Okay, there it is, let's all get out and take a look." Looking around, there are trees and bush, a wooded area, an old shed, and it looked pretty foggy there. It gave us the creeps when we started to walk. We heard the sound of twigs being snapped and wondered if it was some kind of animal, and there was a kind of chill that you got. I had goosebumps all over me, and so did my brother and his friend. It just gave you the creeps, seeing the dense fog and a dull gray color of the area. I said to my brother, "I want to go back to the car and leave. This place gives me the creeps and it's spooky." He said okay. We ran to the car. My brother and his friend hopped into the car and left me there for a joke, standing in the middle of the road, next to this place of all things. They thought it would be funny to leave me there to get scared. They didn't have to leave me there. I was already scared from the walk we had. I started to run and didn't think it was funny at all. I looked back at the place and thought, I saw a headless horseman riding on a horse. I started to get frightened, and tears were coming out of my eyes. I was yelling for my brother to come back repeatedly. All of a sudden, my brother and his friend came back and pulled up next to me. They noticed I was crying. They were laughing when they pulled up, but when they saw me, they stopped. My brother asked what was wrong, and I told him what I saw. He thought I was joking. I told him no, and I explained what it looked like. It went very fast and was a shadow figure as if galloping in and out of the wooded area. It went fast. I heard the horses galloping, but saw a ghostly apparition of the figure. I can't explain it other than this. I could tell it gave my brother and his friend the creeps, because after I told them this, he took off like lightning. After this incident on Texas Road, I heard all of the stories but never really checked into it. I found out that there is a ghostly apparition of a headless horseman or a woman on a horse seen by many people. There is a fog, even though it is a clear day out in the area. It is dull gray in color and sometimes looks greenish. This is exactly the color I saw. There is a cemetery and an old shed on this property, and also a washed out bridge. No one is supposed to go near this area because of the ghostly activity and hauntings. I dated a fellow that lived on this road, but farther up near the street I lived on. I asked him if he was scared living on this road because of all the stories heard and by what happened to me. He said it was his place where he grew up, but he also mentioned to me that he would hear a dog howling, and it bothered him. He said he checked around the neighbors, and nobody owned a dog on that street. Actually, there weren't too many houses in the area, maybe 3 or 4, and they all had acres of land between them. I found out that Texas Road is one of Ontario's haunted places, and there is presently a movie or a film being made of this road. I was young when this incident took place, and I forgot about the story until recently and thought it would be good to write about it since there's so many stories about Texas Road. Thanks for reading. Headless Horseman Haunt. Though my story took place when I was 8 years of age, I can still remember it as bright as day. Many people I talk to write it off as a bad dream or a hallucination, but I know what I experienced, and I know for certain that I was very much awake. There are a few seemingly minor details I must set up first, as they all accumulate to create the entire context of my story. In 2004, during the week of Thanksgiving, my family took a vacation to Disney World in Florida. As it was our first large vacation and we wished to stay for the entire week, we were staying in a rather cheap hotel. The area was made up to look like the French Quarter in New Orleans, and the rooms resembled motel rooms rather than a hotel room. There were 5 people in the room and 2 beds right next to each other. My mom and dad slept in the bed closest to the door with my then 2-year-old little sister. My older brother and I shared the far bed, but slept so that my head was at the foot of the bed, and his head was opposite, at the top. On the day of the incident, my mom and little sister had returned to the room for the day, leaving me, my dad, and my brother to ride all the roller coasters we wanted. They were both dead set on riding the Haunted Mansion ride, but being an 8-year-old little girl, I threw a fit. Finally, they forced me into it, and I grudgingly went along. The very first spooky thing that I saw before entering the ride was the statue of the Headless Horseman riding a black horse with red eyes, dressed in all black, and of course, entirely without a head to speak of. We went through the ride, and as could be expected, I was mortified. That night, as I lie in bed, I couldn't get any sleep. The room was unbearably hot and humid. I couldn't get comfortable, and I had a slight chest cold, which was causing me to cough. Apparently, my father couldn't sleep either, as every time I coughed, he gripped at me to spit, swallow, or quit it. With all these inconveniences combined, I could not sleep more than short half hours. At one point, at around 3:30 a.m., I woke up with a strange feeling of something being wrong. My head was hanging over the edge of the bed, and I could see a small, round, black object on the floor. I then noticed that it was attached to something furry. Initially, I believed it to be one of the stuffed Mickeys we'd bought earlier in the day, but then I realized that it was something much larger. I followed the object up when I realized what it was: a large, bony, furry leg, and found myself staring into the red, glowing eyes of a big, black horse. It then dawned on me that it was the same horse, rider and all, as the statue from the outside of the Haunted Mansion in my hotel room. To make matters worse, it then blinked, blew hot breath out of its nose, and clopped its hooves on our floor. I tried desperately to pull the blanket over my head, but my brother had wrapped himself in it. I then tried to grab the sheet, but my brother was laying on it, and I could only get enough to cover 2/3 of myself. I then lay very still, telling myself I was dreaming, just scared from the ride earlier that day, and that if I fell asleep, it would all go away. I then felt more phlegm coming up in my throat and tried my best not to cough, fearing that it might alert the beast and its spectral rider. Finally, it became too uncomfortable and I had to cough up the mucus. That's when something even more strange happened. My dad once again scolded me and told me to stop coughing. That was it for me. If my dad was also awake, then I was indeed not dreaming. After 10 minutes of being terrified, I fell asleep for another hour. I then woke up and peeked from under the sheet, expecting that the vision would be gone, and that I was really just a victim of my own overactive imagination. I looked first to my parents, seeing that they had shifted some in their sleep. I then tried to see if my brother had let go some of the sheet he was laying on. Alas, no. Then, tentatively, I looked into where the horse was. It was still there, shifting on its feet, as if anxious to move, rider still sitting up, bone straight. Again, I lay still, and eventually fell asleep for around 40 minutes. The next time I awoke, I could hear the horse nicker and the husky, strained breaths of the rider. I couldn't bring myself to look up this time. Finally, I fell asleep for another hour and woke up half an hour before everyone else was set to. Sunlight was beginning to come in through the windows, and sky was that telltale blue, giving away that it was early morning. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm, and threw my head up at where I had seen the apparition the night before, with no fear. Indeed, it was gone. Ironically, my brother had also rolled off the sheet and even loosened some blanket. I was able to sleep peacefully for that last half hour. The incident did not take place again for the next few nights, and my parents did not believe me when I told them. Both made a very good point. With the room being as small as it was, wouldn't they have seen the Headless Horseman too? To me, this story was very real, and I know very well what I saw. What's more is that when returned sometime later at the late age of 16 and rode the ride and saw the horseman, I felt a deep sense of uneasiness. To many, it will seem the case of a child and a manifestation of their fear, but to me, it will always be an unexplainable ghost story. The Headless Horseman. To start off, I never actually got to see the apparition myself. My mother did. She told me the story recently. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, the story starts in a small town in Mexico. It's 3 a.m., and my mom was walking home with her friends from the dance they were attending. Along the way, my mom's heels of her heels break, so they all stop and sit down on a bench nearby to rest. Take note, this is all taking place in the mid-80s. They stay there for a bit to talk about what a great time they had. They were laughing, having a good time, when my mom notices out on the horizon, she can see a group of horsemen that appear to be Native Americans, to which she thought is weird because there is not known to be Native Americans in that town or in Mexico. Well, she thinks that's very weird, but doesn't give it a second thought. They start to walk home, and my mom and her friends hear what sounds to be a bunch of horses and people shouting, "Yee, yeah!" They hear the buckling of the horses' feet, and they start to run because they hear it getting closer. As they were crossing a bridge you need to get past to get home, they noticed a man with no head, with a cowboy hat on, and medallions and jewels around his neck. It was scary because the man was dressed in like these black clothes, trench coat, and gloves. The freakiest thing was that the hat was floating where his head should be. They all stopped in shock, not being able to think. They just stood there. He signals his horse to do that thing where they buckle their front feet in the air, and as they did that, his medallions blinded them for a bit, and he disappeared with the Native Americans. Still in shock, they ran home and locked themselves in a room.